the coupling or the point of reference is in fact the mention that Professor Kera made to the Young Turks legislation in 1908.
The revolution.
Well, the Young Turk Revolution was 1908. I thought the legislation comes in fairly fast afterwards.
Yeah,
but anyhow, it's an equalization which opened up the Ottoman army to non-Muslims, including Jews. What Matilda has provided is two moments in 19th century history that opened up other armies to Jews. And she says she'd like to point to two unique events that happened in the 19th century and changed Jews' lives. First, as a result of the Premier decree, which was promulgated in 1870, Jews of Algeria received full French citizenship and full civil rights. The other event in the 19th century was in the signing of the Treaty of Berlin, which was in 1878. And it included various points relating to Jews, and among other things, it gave full civil rights to Jews in Serbia, Montenegro, Romania, Rumelia, and Bulgaria. And this civil rights had consequences, one in terms of migration, but it also had consequences in terms of serving in the First World War. And hence, Matilda has drawn our attention to two genealogical sources which relate to two countries, one of Jews in Algeria and the other in Bulgaria. There is a Golden Book of Algerian Jewry, edited by the Algerian Committee for Social Studies, and was published in Algiers in 1919, presumably in French. And it contains the names of over more than 2,100 war casualties, I assume deaths, out of 14,000 Jews who were conscripted into the Algerian army. The second genealogical source is a database covering nearly 1,000 names of Bulgarian Jews who perished during the Balkan Wars and World War I, and it's searchable on SephardicGen.com, where the bases are offered alphabetically by country, and under that one looks for Bulgaria. So thank you for this little contribution. It's now my pleasure to introduce our last speaker this afternoon, who is Rose Feldman, known, I should think, to almost everybody in this room. What I did not know is that your Twitter handle is Jew Date a Gen Girl. Right. But there we go. You operate the Twitter and Facebook for IGRA. You're in charge of developing new databases for the Israel Genealogical Research Association, it's IGRA. You've lectured at 9 IA JGS conferences, IGRA and IGS events. Also taken part in genealogical workshops at Central Zionist Archives, and you are one of the 3 coordinators of the Montefiore Census Project.
Together with Matilda.
Together with Matilda and Billy, I guess. And we are now going to...
Yes.
That's great.
Okay, I'll try.
Rose's subject is up on the wall on both sides, and in the middle, the Jews in Eretz Israel during World War I.
Thank you for coming to my lecture. My lecture is going to be a bit more like Daniel's in that I'm going to take you through various events, but based on documents that we found. Many of these documents are databases already on the IGRA website, but I'll show you that there's just so much available if you look. And we shall start our trip. These are just part list of archives in Israel where you can find materials dealing with the Jews during World War I. We found materials in the National Archives in London, in Beit HaGdudim, in Avichail, in the Petah Tikva Historical Archives, the National Library, the Central Zionist Archives, Yad Tabenkin, the Machon Jabotinsky, the Commonwealth Forces Graves website, and the Jerusalem Archives of their small archive of the Edah Sfaradit and the Jerusalem Archives and others. This is a poster that was published in Yiddish in America with the idea of enticing the Jewish boys of America to register in the British Army so they could serve in the Jewish legions. And these are the posters that were published and handed out through England. As you can see, there was a large social pressure being put on the Jewish boys to serve in the British Army because the British Army would be capturing Palestine. In the Jewish battalions, which most of us know about much more than the Jews that served in the Turkish army, there were 5 battalions. You had the Zion Mule Corps in 1915, the 38th Battalion of Royal Fusiliers, 1918 to 1919, the 39th Battalion, which was called the American Battalion, the 40th Royal Fusiliers Battalion, and the 1st Judeans. In his memoirs about the Legion, Jabotinsky described the composition of the 5,000-member Legion as 34% from the United States, 30% from Palestine, 28% from England, 6% from Canada, 1% Ottoman War prisoners, and 1% from Argentina. There were 5,000 soldiers that served, and as the war ended, there were another 5,000 that were ready to become soldiers, but because the war ended, they were released. Of these 5,000, you can find information for 1,700 of them in Beit HaGdudim. They had questionnaires which they had people who had served in the legions and to fill out. Of course, most of these were filled out by people who live here in Israel, but they also give their biographies and what they did besides serving in the legions. We're still looking for more information in the archives of the UK. The Zion Mule Corps served in Gallipoli. The 38th Battalion was trained in Egypt and fought in the Jordan Valley. The 39th Battalion fought in the Jordan Valley. The 40th was mostly from Palestine and mainly did guard duty. Almost all the members of the Jewish regiments were discharged immediately after the end of World War I in November 1918. The only battalion is the 1st Judeans this battalion was formed in 1920, and it was awarded a distinctive cap badge, a menorah with the Hebrew word Kadima on it. The 1st Jewish Battalion served as an auxiliary unit. They were not a fighting unit. They're called the Zion Mule Corps. They were transporting the guns and the weapons and the food. As you saw this document in Daniel's lecture, this is the property of the National Library. It's in the Trumpeldor archive, and it's the Russian exiles that served in the Mule Corps and then re-enlisted. And when you say there were 5,000 members in the Jewish legions, it's questioned because when one battalion was discharged, some of them re-enlisted in another. So I don't know if the 5,000 is 5,000 brutto or 5,000 netto.
Why would a list like that be asked? Why would a list of Russian Jews be requested?
Well, here I was able to enlarge it, and it was sent to Trumpeldor, and I don't know if he wanted it to get them to re-enlist, or because they were forming other battalions for the Jewish Legion that he wanted them to change. in the little reading that I've done, I saw that soldiers were transferring from regular battalions into the Jewish legions. So it might be for that reason. These are the two of the medals that some of the soldiers received. We only found a list of medals given out to the Zion Mule Corps, and I'll explain why. But as you say, the 7 were entitled to the Victory Medal, 14 to the British War Medal, 227 to the Victory Medal or the British War Medal, and 658 received a decoration under the Army Order from 1919. Now, what's the difference between these two medals? The British War Medal was authorized in 1919 and was awarded to eligible service personnel and civilians. The basic requirement was that they either entered a theater of war or rendered approved service overseas between 1914 and November 1918. And since some of the battalions were formed in 1919, they would not come under this ruling. The Victory Medal was authorized in 1919 and was awarded to all eligible personnel who served on the establishment of a unit in an operational theater. So this is why only a few of them received the Victory Medal, whereas more received the British War Medal. This is an interesting medal. It's called Free Judea, Yuda HaMishuk Eretz, and it was cast here in Palestine and given to 460 volunteers out of the 700 volunteers that joined the Jewish Legion in July 1918. Now, what is interesting about this medal is that it's based on the idea of a medal from the Roman times when Judea was shackled to the palm tree, and here she is released from the palm tree, and the Roman soldier is fleeing. And there is an article at Molbai that's published by Yad Ben Tzvi that describes this medal. There were 53 volunteers from Argentina, and if you just think of the idea, they immigrated from Eastern Europe to Argentina. From Argentina with their families, they then immigrated to England, and there they joined the British Army and served. So they went back and forth across the Atlantic, and one of them has written a book, and I received permission to make a list for our database of the 53 volunteers from Argentina. The Petition of Mercy, this was written by Jabotinsky in 1919. There were 54 soldiers of the 38th and 39th battalions that were sentenced by court-martial to penal servitude. And it's something like a 4 or 5 page document. Roni Azati from Jacobi sent it to me, and it's interesting what Jabotinsky writes to the king. Sire, it is the general impression of all responsible Jews in Palestine that the military authorities, acting in the name of your Majesty's government, have made the Holy Land the theater of undisguised anti-Jewish policy. Still, the overwhelming majority of Jewish soldiers stuck to their duty, but if 54 of them failed, the moral responsibility for their failure rests with those who trampled upon their ideals, humiliated their dignity as men, Jews, and soldiers, and made every Jew in Palestine, soldier and civilian alike, waver in their beliefs in England's loyalty to her pledges.
Are you sure that's World War I?
Yeah, World War I. Sounds like today.
What does he actually mean? What's he actually referring to?
Hmm?
What is the anti-Jewish policy referring to?
They wouldn't they were only guards. They wouldn't, if a Jew was being attacked, they wouldn't allow them to protect the Jew. It goes on, things that happened in Jaffa, the Jewish soldiers were sent to another area so they couldn't protect the Jews. There were many instances, and some of them are described in this 5-page letter. Here is a list of the Jews. Again, we've made a database of this. It's available on our website. This is a picture that
Did the king respond?
What?
Did the king respond?
I don't know. I'm not the historian. I'm the genealogist. This is a picture of a picture that I found in Beit HaKdudim. And as I was explaining to you, this is an example. It's a picture of the sergeants who came to the rescue of Tel Aviv Jaffa because there were riots there, and the Arabs were attacking the Jews that lived there. The Commonwealth forces that were serving in Palestine lost many people here. There are over 12,000 British soldiers buried in Israel, most of them non-Jewish. This is their website where you can go in and you can put in a name, and this includes both World War I, World War II, and other wars, and you can find out where the person is buried.
There's one in Beersheba.
What? In Beersheba? Yes, I know.
That's ignored usually. Is that on your website? Did you put those
We
in?
got it. We were given permission to extract those of the Jewish faith, and we put this as one of our databases on our website. As you can see, there's information of where they're buried, what regiment they were in, what unit or battalion, what their rank was, and sometimes it even has a father's name on it. There is a project called Billion Graves, which is asking people to volunteer and take photographs of graves in all the cemeteries of the world. And I'm just showing you some of the examples. Some will be from the British military cemeteries. This is from Jerusalem. This is Galinsky, Private N. Galinsky. It doesn't have very much information, but it has the Star of David, so you know he was of the Jewish faith. The one on the left is from Beersheba, and you see the name. You see that he is not serving in one of the Jewish battalions. He's serving in one of the other battalions when he died, and the name of his parents. And then at the bottom it says, so far from home, yet so near to those who love him. The one on the right I put as an example of someone who found it important to say that he served in World War I. It's someone from the U.S. who served in World War I, and then I guess he moved to Israel or to Palestine and then Israel at some time. And he is buried in the Alliance Church Cemetery in Jerusalem, and it says that he served in World War I. Now I came across this particular tombstone because we're participating in the Billion Graves project, and we have taken pictures of this cemetery. This is someone else who served in World War I in the Jewish Legion. I don't know if he died as a soldier or if he died as a civilian, but because he was a soldier, they put the information in his graveyard. He is buried in the Trumpeldor Cemetery in Tel Aviv, and I think he was serving as a soldier because he also appears on the Commonwealth Graves website. And because he was buried in the Jewish cemetery, there's much more information like we're used to, and it says Gelman Nahum, he was a private. When he died, what his number was, he was 28, he was in the 38th Battalion, and he was the son of Bracha Gelman, and he was a native of Kiev. Various people find it important that they mention that they served during the Jewish legions. There were riots in Jaffa in 1921, and Yuda Leib Cherkasky was killed. He was managing the Beit HaChalutz in there, and he refused to leave it or to send his family to safety because he wanted to protect the people there. And so on his tombstone in Trumpeldor Cemetery, it says that he died on May 21, 1921, and here it says that he served in the Dud Hashlishi of the Royal Fusiliers. He refused to save himself and his family from the riots, and he fell in the defense of Beit HaChalutz that he fought to preserve together with his wife.
אפשר להזכיר שפויינר נרצח באותה...
הוא נרצח
גם ברנר, הסופר.
כן. זה שומע באמריקה גדולה. I think all of you are familiar with the Yizkor website that was developed by the Israeli army, but in the last couple of years they've gone back and included people who died in various paramilitary events that preceded the forming of the State of Israel. This is someone who who died in 1920. He was serving in the British Army. He's buried in the British Military Cemetery in Ramleh. And they also have a description of him and a picture. This is the museum at Beit HaBikayah. It's called Beit HaGudim Museum. Now, they've changed the name. It used to be Jewish volunteers to the British Armed Forces during World War I. It is now during World War I and World War II. They built an additional wing for World War II. As I said, they have 170,000 biographies. We have built an index for that, and it's also on our website. So when you go into our website and you find the name, you'll know that you can go there and see the actual biography that they pulled out. This is from Yad Ben Tzvi, who has a project called Yisrael Niglet La'ayin. I don't know how they translate it to English. I guess they call it Israel Album. And these are two cards for Rosh Hashanah. One is of two different soldiers that might be from both sides of the war greeting each other. And this is from the legions, and they all took a picture together to make a postcard to send for the greetings for the holidays. There is a group in Israel that is interested in the Society for the Heritage of World War I. They have lectures, and they have a website where you can find out what they've been doing. Now, there are other sides to this story. It isn't only the British Legion or the Jews that served in the British Legion. There's the story of those who lived in Eretz Israel. As was mentioned, there were eternal exiles. The Petach Tikva was exiled to Tel Aviv. My mother was exiled to Neve Tzedek, and she was with her sisters and her parents. And then from Petach Tikva, they were exiled. They were supposed to be exiled north. Tel Aviv was exiled to Petach Tikva and Kfar Saba and north. And then there's the external exile that the dates I had are different from what Yitzhak had, but from December 1914 through September 1915. This is from the Central Zionist Archives. This is one of the ledgers of those exiled from Tel Aviv and the area. And what's interesting, you have the name. Sometimes you don't have a name. It just says 3 boys. But you have families, you have the family names, you have the occupation. Oh, no. You have, what am I supposed to, here's the occupation, here's the address, and here are their comments. And sometimes it says who they left the furniture with and who they left the key to the apartment with. And we will be building a database from this, and we hope to find more ledgers. This is a picture I found on the internet of the American Army transferring people to Alexandria. Again, Yitzhak had other numbers. The number that Matilda found when she was doing research on this was that there were 11,277 refugees to Alexandria. From the Central Zionist Archive, you can find pictures from World War I of the refugees in Egypt. This I found in the archives of Petach Tikva. Petach Tikva was at that time a moshava, and they distributed food stamps to the people living there. And this is the first time that I saw my grandfather's signature. He signed to get food stamps for the family. And it was exciting because I had never seen anything from my grandfather except from his student stone. And it says Shlomo Epstein, and I suppose this is the value, and someone had to co-sign for him. And then in some other document, a few months later, I found him signing again, and then I found him co-signing for someone else. Here you can see an example of the stamps that they were given to buy food. These are the stamps that he was given, because at that time he had 3 daughters and a son So they would have gotten stamps for 5 people. These are stamps for 4 people. Again, as Yitzhak mentioned, you have the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee archives online. And these are examples of people sending money to other people in Palestine. Well, what's interesting is you have who sent the money and who they were sending the money to. Some of these lists can be read quite easily, and some of them cannot be read quite easily. But you can go through it on the internet and look for information. When we were working with the Central Zionist Archives, they gave us a file that had 2 pages in it, and one of the files had 2 pages in it, and it was a list of people requesting to come back from Egypt to Eretz Israel, I guess at the end of the war. And lo and behold, here's my mother's cousin. Now we knew he had been exiled, but this was the proof. And when I called his son and daughter, who are still alive, and I told them, I have the proof of when your grandfather wanted to come back and how old he was, and his son said, that's great, now we know, because we weren't sure if he died at the age of 71 or 73. Now we can figure out which one is the right age. And it also says who were the people who gave him who considered him worthy of returning. And you have Yehezkel Matalon from Alexandria and Zalman Shach from Jaffa. This is another example of a document that I found in the Petah Tikva archives. It was given into the British government for damages that were incurred in some of the orchards when the British Army were going through. And so on this side you have the name of the family, and then you have what happened to it. And there's just lots and lots of material available. Thanks to the National Library, we have many historical newspapers available. And in Hatzira, in 1918, they were publishing lists of people who were sending regards to people abroad. Now what happened is that because of World War I, people lost contact with their families. And so one of the ways was to publish an announcement in the paper. And here you have Harav Israel Tziton, Raphael, Lev Meir, Cyril. In other words, he names all the people in the family are now in Jerusalem, and some of them ask for help, but it's again, there are continuous places. Now, the OCR does not always work well on these pages because when they scan them, it depends if the original was of a good quality and what was the quality of the OCR that they did. So sometimes you just have to find a page that deals with something and start reading through it. Here's another example. And there were those who didn't survive the exile during World War I. And besides their tombstone, you have places like Kfar Saba who have set up memorials to the people.
אפשר לראות את הקודם עוד פעם? תודה.
This one.
כן, כן.
You found someone?
Not yet.
Okay. Now, you have to understand, some people were exiled from Palestine because they didn't want Turkish citizenship, or they weren't granted Turkish citizenship. But there were those who came and went to school here, or were living here, and then were inducted into the Turkish army. So we found a list in the Central Zionist Archives of 61 Jewish officers. They had all studied, they had all come from the Ukraine and that area of Eastern Europe, had studied in Jaffa and in Jerusalem, and then they were inducted into the army. Of these, not of the officers, but of those Jews serving in the Ottoman army, 92 were captured and then were permitted to join the 40th Battalion of the British Army. This story was told to me by one of the archivists working at the Petah Tikva archives, and it's about her father and her uncle. Meir and Avram Frank were from Yaffo. Avram, while in Alexandria, joined the Jewish Legion and was killed at Gallipoli on the 14th of May, 1915. Mayer, after all the metal in the workshop in Yaffa was confiscated, he was caught. And I emphasize the word caught because he was caught a couple of times, and the first time they paid to get him free, and then the next time they couldn't pay. And he was exiled to Anatolia, where he managed a workshop for repairing wagons for the Turkish army. This book was shown by Daniel. It just came out this last year, and it's about Obed Amitai, Jewish Ottoman officer at war and British captive during World War I. In 1919, a book was published called Rishat Shalom, which was similar to what we saw in the newspaper, of people here in Palestine sending regards to people abroad. And now it could have been read by their family, or by their family that moved to another place, or by friends of the family. This is my father's cousin, Chaim Pinchas Resnick. He's telling his parents, Eliezer and Rivka Resnick. Eliezer is the brother of my grandmother in Kalinovka, where my father was born, and that he is well and safe in Jaffa. So from 1916, he was an officer in the Turkish army. Why? Because he was going to the gymnasia in Yafo, and then he was inducted into the army. And then he went to officers training in Kushta, and that they can write to him. Kushta is Istanbul. And then they can write, and what address they can write to him. Just a few months ago, we received the 1890 Nefels and the 1910 Nefels of the Sephardim in Jerusalem, and we are now building databases from these. The 1910 includes the whole family, and I think the 1890 may include only the males. One of our newest finds is from the National Library, and this is the same Nefus or census from 1892, I believe, from Baghdad. Now, we all know that there's very little material available for Iraq, and so if we manage to build a database out of this, it'll really be great for a lot of people, because they'll be able to find their grandparents or their great-grandparents in it. The Turkish military have 6 cemeteries in Israel and Palestine. I don't know where they are. I tried looking for them on the internet, and I was not successful. And there were also Ottoman prisoners of war who were sent to Myanmar. Yes, and the conditions were very bad, and many of them were buried there. They died there.
Why were they sent to Burma?
The British sent them to Burma. They were prisoners of war. Ottoman soldiers who were prisoners of war with the British, and they were sent, and they were interned in Burma, and the conditions were very bad. Now, there may even be Jews among them. We don't know. And another part of World War I, which many of you know, is Neely, the underground that helped the British legions. Now, Neely stands for Netzach Yisrael Lo Yishaker, and the translation is the eternity God of Israel will not lie. And they were an espionage network that was working mainly out of Zichron. Now, here you have an example of some of the spies. You have Eitan Belkin and Nachman Belkin. And and they went to the military school, probably in Istanbul, and you have pictures of them. And later on, they were caught as spies for the British in the underground movement of Neely. Now, what's interesting is that when I was searching the historical newspapers for Belkin, I found that one of them even got a Hitsteinut when he was in the British Army, meaning that he was very good at either shooting or doing something, and then later on they caught him as a spy. Another example of something that I found in the newspapers is about people in 1916 that they were celebrating Sukkot in Nazareth, and here is the great-grandfather or the grandfather of a very close friend of ours. So you read these things and you keep coming up with things and people you know of or know or related to. Many of you who Neely know about the story of Absalom Feinberg, who belonged to the Neely espionage group. And he was killed as he was crossing the desert, and they have the whole story here. But what's interesting is that when he was killed, he had dates in his pocket. And where they buried him in the sand, date trees grew up. And it's 1967, or after the Six-Day War, someone was able to find the place where he was buried, and they found his bones, and they were transferred to the military cemetery in Har Herzl. And again, in the Yisro book, you have also about Sarah Aronson, and when she was captured, she committed suicide in order not to be sent to, I guess, to Istanbul. Now, there was much conflict within the Jewish population of those who supported the network, the espionage, and those who were scared that the Turks would retaliate and wanted to give up the spies so that the Turks would not retaliate against the other people in the community. And the story continues even after the World War. In Machon Jabotinsky, I found a list of Jewish Legion members, I think from the 1930s, living in Jerusalem. We found a short list of people who wanted to settle on the land, and actually you have 6 different settlements that were settled by the people who served in the Jewish legions. Abichail, Tel Adashim, Beratuvia, Kfar Yecheskel, Kfar Malal, and Balforia. I also found a list of members of the Jewish Legion in 1915, and I'm looking at the list, and I see a name. When I came in 1961, we went to visit someone who had employed my father before World War II. My father had a degree in agriculture, and when they immigrated to the States, he was working in the hothouses in Chicago. And I remember I was 17 years old, my mother took me to see this man, and he was working as a gardener in Har Herzl, and I didn't know who he was. But all of a sudden I find his name, and then I realized the story they told. He got sunstroke during World War I, and he was a bit cuckoo. And he returned to Palestine in the late 50s, and here he is in the list as belonging to the Jewish Legion. And then I understood why, what had happened to him, because as a 17-year-old they just told me, well, he's not so, he's a bit touched in the head. With over 500 public and private archives in Israel alone, and the National Library can verify this, there's much more material to be found, and maybe in a few more years we'll find more and we'll make more databases. The Igor collection for World War I is from different archives around the world and is now online. You can register free and use it. And in case you don't know, we are part of the hosting organization of the 35th International Conference on Jewish Genealogy, which will take place in July here in Jerusalem. And at the moment, the call for papers went out. And if you register on our website, you'll get information about when to register for the conference. And thank you for listening.
That was great. Questions?
But there's obviously discrepancies between your figures and my figures. I tried not to do the generalizations. I tried to use sort of more list-based data. Okay, so. But what was interesting, obviously, you total from many more people who were part of the first expulsions, and the first expulsions were much, from the literature it seems like it's very minor, but it's not minor. But also on the other end, from Egypt, it's harder to find the numbers of who arrived.
No, there are many things. Also, it may be that our information is from a book of an earlier date, from the book that you used. And every historian collects his material and uses information. But the fact that there are, we had the lower number of 11,000, you had a higher number. So we can both agree that there were at least 11,000 Jews expelled from Palestine.
Yeah, no, it's much more, but you pinpointed the first part, which actually in the general literature is much more downplayed, and 1917 is much more upscale.
It could be, but again, if we find more ledgers in the Central Zionist Archives, like we found this one, then we'll start collaborating, and finding out exactly how many are from which places in Palestine, and I doubt if we'll find 11,000. But Matilda found one list in the National Library 10 years ago that had the names of over 1,000 people. Remember when you did in about 2005, and it was about 1,500 people, a list, but we don't know where the rest of that list is because they only have a few pages of it here in the National Library.
Well, I think we've all been enlightened by our three speakers, so thank you very much. Thank you for attending.
Okay.
Neville, on this opportunity, now that Matilda's back in shape,
חשוב לי שאתה תראה
שם העיתון, קצת תפס את אין חומר, זה לא כמו ספר של המון ספרים שמשנה כרגע זה אין הרבה מה לעשות עם זה את העיתון ג'וס ולא, זה נותן העיתונים של השבוע האחרון אין פה מה לעשות
הזמן הזה
כרגע זה להציג את מה שהשבוע האחרון יכול לתת את זה שם
זהו, בדיוק.
זה משהו, זה לא ספר שלי, אני מתקן את התאריך. לא, פרק שלו, לא
השאלה, איך אתה רואה את המינימום?
אבל יש
גם שמדבר עיתונים לפני חודש, יש עיתון של היום, יש אתמול, של המחקר ההיסטורי,
No, you should take on there. Yeah, busy yes. ויש יותר צנוע, מעבר לכביש, שנקרא שנייה הלכות. יותר קרוב לשנייה. והסבא שלי היה מייסד. הוא הביא